Thank you very much, Concepcion. So it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, unfortunately, Coralie could not join us today. She's not feeling well. But if I'm as fortunate as Rachel, maybe my cat will join me. I'd like to just start maybe a little introduction just before I get into the presentation. Just to briefly explain that the foundations of experiential learning were laid 100 years ago by John Dewey, who explored how doing leads to better learning. And these ideas were originally most often applied to children, but over the years they've been developed for general learning theory and are now often applied in a variety of contexts with learners of all ages. So for our purposes, looking specifically at language classes, which lend themselves quite easily to experiential learning, language classes are often structured around communication, which is in and of itself an experience. So thinking of communicative exchanges like sharing food or watching movies and talking about those experiences, these are both cultural and experiential. But what we were looking for, Coralie and I, as we were developing this course, is we were looking to take our students on a deeper journey. So deeper into the culture that surrounds them and deeper in their own connections with that culture. So the aim is a course that empowers students to take control of their learning. And this is the shift that Rachel was just speaking about. So that's really, it was one of the objectives that we were aiming for. So today I'd like to share with you how we've developed a bilingual experiential course with a look at the outings and activities that we designed to guide students in their own learning. And I'll start with, so just a little outline to give you a sense of where I'm going in the presentation. I'll first talk about the academic context and just a general sense of the student population. We'll look at the program that we developed for our students. It's called the Montreal Experience. And then specifically looking at the two culminating experiential courses in that program. And then I'd like to look more specifically at one of those classes, which is called Montreal Through Language and Culture. So to begin our academic context, first, I think it's important to explain that Montreal is a city in Quebec, in Canada, and it is officially a unilingual city. So French is the official language of the city. Many people live and work entirely in French, and a small number of people live and work entirely in English. But more often than not, to get ahead, you actually need both languages. So we like to say that Montreal is unofficially a bilingual city. Coralie and I teach at the University of Quebec in Montreal, which is a downtown university, and the language courses are academically or professionally oriented. Many programs at the university require students outside of the language school, require students to take English language courses or sometimes other language courses in order to complete their bachelor's degree. And within the École de Langue, the language school, in our department, we also offer programs for students, certificates and majors, for those students who are looking to focus specifically on their language skills, such as English or French. Within the classes are often a variety, a mix of students from other programs, and this includes exchange students and certificate students. So in the French and English programs, these students are often recent immigrants and also students from other programs with the same goal, which is ultimately to work in Montreal. In French, evidently, the students are almost entirely recent immigrants. And because of the significant number of students that were completing certificates in both languages, we created a program that caters more specifically to these students. So we found that a large number of students were completing the French certificate and then also completing the English certificate. And we thought we could actually meet their needs by developing a program for them, specifically for them. And that program is called the Montreal Experience. So this is a bilingual certificate. Students are learning both English and French. They have 10 courses to complete, and they're studying English and French simultaneously. So the requirement is that students start at a high intermediate level in one of the two languages, and it's for them to choose if they want to focus on French or on English. So they need to take, just I'm going to outline the program very quickly, they need to take 6 courses in one language, starting at a high intermediate level, so that they finish at an advanced level in that language. For the other language that they're studying simultaneously, depending on where they start, they could start as beginners or high intermediate. They'll finish either at low intermediate or maybe advanced. Again, it depends entirely on where they're starting in that other language. And then to complete the program, there are 2 experiential courses, and they complete those 2 courses in their stronger language. So for those experiential courses, students need to be at an advanced level. And the idea there is that they have a more developed awareness of both the language and culture of that language that they're studying. And we want to support students as they integrate more fully, and felt that guiding them through experiential courses was the ticket. Again, this speaks to what Rachel was saying previously. We really see ourselves in this course as guides, taking students on this journey where they're taking control of their learning. So I'll just move then into these 2 experiential courses. So we have the first experiential course that's listed here is called Community in Montreal Through Language and Culture. And the objective here is for students to build community connections through service learning. So students are placed with a community organization and they are developing their intercultural communication skills. This course rests, I think, more firmly on the ideas of Vygotsky's ideas of the zone of proximal development. So students are really pushing the boundaries of their learning through intercultural communication. They reflect and then they go back and they try and repair or develop a skill that they're working on. Students are placed with community organizations because social infrastructure is a huge part of Quebecois culture. And so they're exploring the boundaries of their communication through this active reflection in a community organization and building their cultural understanding simultaneously. In the other course, Montreal Through Language and Culture, students are exploring physical spaces to develop a sense of belonging. And they're doing this through different facets of culture. And we'll talk about what we mean by culture in a minute. But first, I just want to recognize, Coralie and I both acknowledge that we can't actually tease apart language and culture, but we can more artfully weave experiences into language courses to tighten that interconnectedness. So if we're taking the weaving analogy a little further, and I don't know if there's any knitters out there, but when we make the weave tighter, we make it stronger. And what we want to do is make the language and culture connection stronger for students through these experiences. We find that sometimes in the confines of a classroom, that weave between language and culture can become a bit artificial and sometimes a bit static. So we want to bring essentially bring the students to the culture in every class. Each week we're taking them out of the classroom. We rarely meet in the classroom, and we are exploring, again, different facets of culture each week. And so just to talk about the structure of these classes, we really looked at two models for experience-based learning. And the more popular of the two is Kolb's model of experiential learning, which is very cyclical. There's a concrete experience, a reflection. They think about what happened in that, for our students, in that interaction, and then they have active experimentation. They go back and they revisit and again expand those intercultural communications. So we do actually apply that to the service learning course. This is precisely what students in that class are doing. In the Montreal Through Language and Culture course, where we're taking students out and exploring different facets of culture, we were looking for a model that was a little bit more flexible. So we fell on Anderson, Bood, and Cohen's criteria, which really appealed to us because it provided for a lot more flexibility, in short. So we can see in their list of criteria, we have that the experience be meaningful, that there is a sense of engagement, that there are ongoing opportunities to reflect, that the experiences involving different senses and emotions, that there's some recognition of prior learning, and that there is this notion of valuing trust, respect, and openness. So again, we really thought that that provided us with a little bit more flexibility in this course. And I can some examples of the outings or invitations and the assignments that students have had, and what the impact has been. So the course objective for Montreal Through Language and Culture is really twofold. Of course, they continue to develop their language skills, but also they are exploring and connecting different aspects of culture to deepen their sense of self in the language and in the place, the city of Montreal. So I've made reference to these notions of culture, and I'll just clarify that when we talk about culture here, we're referring to history, art, like music and theater, society, we're talking about people and places, as well as attitudes, developing opinions, just to give you a few examples.
Roisin?
Yes?
5 more minutes?
Okay, surprise.
5 more minutes. Thank you.
I'm easily startled. So the activities are intended to develop their understanding of these aspects of culture and develop their sense of belonging through shared reflections. The reflections here in this class are less about themselves and the language that they're using. This is more in the other course that focuses on the Kolb model. Those reflections are much more self-referencing, much more meta. And here students are encouraged to extend the experience, to make it meaningful for themselves. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But I think this also speaks to what Rachel was talking about. And when we make this meaningful for themselves. So it isn't because we speak English or French that we can find ourselves, that we can find our place in Montreal. We need to deepen these connections, these cultural connections to different aspects of culture to have a firmer sense of ourself in the city. And ultimately, we do this to bring our students to the point where they will call themselves Montrealers. That's the ultimate goal. So students are no longer studying a language, but rather claiming the culture through that language and these experiences. as an example of an experience, maybe I'll speak first about this picture on the right, because you can see. So this is an example of an invited speaker that we had. And this is Elizabeth Shepherd, who is a jazz musician. She's not originally from Montreal, but she calls Montreal her home. She calls herself a Montrealer, and she has, she came and she spoke to the students about an album that she made called Montreal. And the idea behind that album was she was exploring her own sense of belonging by interviewing Montrealers and then turning their stories into music. So she was exploring her own sense of belonging, because when people asked her where she was from, she would say she's a Montrealer, and they would say, but where are you really from? And that was really something that resonated with our students, because of course that's something that they're encountering all the time. And so we invited our students to then go out and interview Montrealers to extend that discussion. And then they shared their interviews and perceptions of those interactions and feelings that were shared. So this was really an example of a group reflection. Another example was an outing where students went. They did a walking tour of old Montreal and learned about Montreal's the founding of Montreal. So they were exploring important people and places on this tour. And then students extended their learning by choosing a name that they were familiar with in Montreal. A lot of streets and buildings are named for people. And so they chose a name that they had encountered. And I didn't give them a list. They were free to choose. And then they researched that person and shared it with the class who this person was. And what I found really interesting about this exercise is that of the 8 women in the class, 7 of them chose to research a woman. So they didn't just look and find the easiest or most accessible name. They really went and looked for women, these underrepresented and unsung heroes in Montreal. And it was interesting to see them make connections with the women that have come before them, and seeing how they really sought out these underrepresented and marginalized people and shared how these women made their mark in history, in the history of building the city. So again, these are examples of students really taking ownership of their learning and making it meaningful for themselves. The students are extending their language skills, deepening historical and cultural knowledge, that sense of integration and belonging. In short, it's just really interesting to see students make these connections. They're making connections across classes about people and places that they're learning about, and weaving that with their own opinions as they're forming. So we can hear how they're expanding their sense of self in the city and actually claiming space with these opinions. So we see them really developing their own voice as students and learners and Montrealers. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Roisin. Very nice presentation, and it ties so well with Rachel's presentation. Very much many points of connection between the two presentations. So we are now ready to take questions or remarks from our participants in the audience. You probably, Roisin, can see the remarks that Rachel have